Welcome to the Classics Podcast Does Virgil's Aeneid with myself, Caroline Lawrence.
And me, Katrina Kelly. Hello, welcome back to the Classics Podcast Does Virgil's Aeneid, the series where we pick a Latin word from this ancient epic poem that has many layers of meaning and relevance, allowing us to jump into Virgil's world of imagery, heroes, and jam-packed verse. Last week we enjoyed exploring the muses, which Virgil does and doesn't invoke when composing his poem. And we noted he calls upon erato, that muse of love poetry, in the second half of the epic, beginning that second Italian section. We just want to say first, so thank you so much for the love that you've been showing the podcast. We love doing this, and it's great to have you come along with us and send us your thoughts as well. Please do give us a follow on your podcast platform of choice, rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, and if you're watching on YouTube, hi! Please hit that subscribe button down below so that we can keep the episodes flowing. We're 6 in today, many more to come, and we're going to be talking today about lots of similes. So similes are back on the cards. And our word of this episode is
Cerva.
a simple feminine noun. It declines like mensa, and it means a doe. A deer. A female deer. Okay, no, not that song. Stop me now.
It will soon become clear why we've chosen the word cerva. You know by now that I love storytelling tropes and tricks, and one beat or trope that I don't think I've mentioned too much recently is the opponent.
Mhm.
In many romances and love stories, the opponent is the lover, the love interest, which is kind of crazy, but I guess anyone who's married or in a relationship might understand that.
Yeah.
Um, and that's why in so many romantic comedies, it starts off with the two potential lovers hating each other, taking an instant dislike to each other, which is, it's quite
Pride and
crazy.
Prejudice, Mr. Darcy.
Oh, every, you name a rom-com, they start by fighting each other. Sadly, the story of Dido and Aeneas is the other way around. They start by liking each other. So by Hollywood script writing principles, it's going to have to end on a lower level, and it does indeed. And as ever, of course, Virgil draws on Homer with his magnificent creation, Dido, who is many people's favorite character in the Aeneid. She has aspects of Calypso and Circe and Nausicaa from the Odyssey. But he also draws especially on the Argonautica of Apollonius, where Jason goes on his quest for the Golden Fleece. And along the way, Jason meets the wonderfully named Hypsipyle, who he spends a night with and engenders a kid and goes off again. She's okay about that. But then, of course, he meets Medea. And there was a 4th century commentator on Virgil called Servius, and he comes right out and says it. He says, Apollonius wrote the Argonautica, and in the 3rd book portrays Medea in love. This book, book 4 of the Aeneid, was carried over almost entirely from there. Now, that's not really fair.
Mm.
Virgil doesn't really carry it over. He plays with it, he subverts it, he develops it, he riffs on it, and he adds hundreds of hyperlinks. That's what I call a word that can just be expanded out, like all the words we're using for this podcast.
Mm.
They open up a whole world of deeper meanings and connotations and sometimes subvert what's on the surface. So yeah, that's where he got his inspiration from, but he's made her his own. Now, I've heard some scholars say that Virgil isn't very good at writing women. And yes, some of them, like Lavinia, are a bit two-dimensional, or at least not fleshed out. Maybe he was going to come back and do that more later. But there's several powerful females in the Aeneid, and 2 of them are extremely powerful. Juno, of course, the main opponent of Aeneas, who he never falls in love with.
Definitely
And
not.
he has many powerful and very articulate speeches. And of course, Dido. And she's full of passion and compassion and devotion, and she's anything but two-dimensional. She's a deeply tragic figure. But she's kind of one of your favorite characters, Katrina. So can you tell us a bit more about her? Who is she, and when do we first meet her?
For sure, yes. This is exciting to be able to spend a little bit more time with Dido. And we will come back to that word, Cerva. It will be our hyperlink for this episode, but you've got to listen on to find out how. So before we reach book four, I am going to cycle back in time. We're going to be introduced first to Dido in book one, in Carthage, which is a city beloved by Juno, who you just mentioned, who's fearful of this prophecy that there'll be a race of men who will one day overthrow this Tyrian citadel. And Dido actually is introduced to us by Aeneas's mother, Venus, in the guise of a local girl. Again, one of those disguise scenes that is, this one is a bit of a weird one actually, but we won't go there. She's a refugee who came, so the Latin is fugiens, fleeing, from the city of Tyre to escape her brother due to a crime. She's been miserai, so wretched in love, because furor, fury, that's that word. We've mentioned it so many times already, and many more to come as well. Furor caused her brother Pygmalion to attack and kill her husband, Zacchaeus. I hope you're still with us. Upon his death, she was then aigram amantem, lovesick. Zacchaeus came to her in a dream, urged her to escape, which she did, and she's founded the new city here, where Aeneas meets her. And she's described as dux femina facti. Dux femina, a leader, a woman. So she's set up as someone who's also fled in ships from her homeland to somewhere new, as someone who's undergone some emotional trauma and being guided by a ghostly apparition, a ghostly spouse. She's a leader, a dux femina. Those are neatly put next to each other. But note how it's actually the men there, I think, who have had the agency, and she's been adversely affected by their actions. She is so far a victim. And there also isn't a feminine form in the Latin of dux. That is the male and female version, as it were. So that's why it works so nicely to have femina juxtaposed.
Fascinating.
And I know a slight but important detour here now is that meanwhile in book one, Aeneas has been storm-tossed, he finds refuge on the shores of Libya, he makes a fire and finds three stags, in the end killing seven beasts, a meal for each of his remaining ships. And as a hunter, he's therefore provided for his men personally. And importantly, there's a nice quote which says that he showed them the face of hope and kept his misery deep in his heart. So we have some immediate similarities and links here between the two characters as they are sort of set up to come to their first meeting. So Aeneas journeys towards Carthage, we get the famous bee simile, suggesting that the Tyrians are this hive of activity and Dido is the queen bee at the middle. So they're successfully doing what he's got to do. They're sort of providing a blueprint, some hope, some piety. We've already spoken about the murals on the Temple of Juno, the ekphrasis of that scene. And then Dido appears like Diana, and this is the key bit. Aeneas is described as stupet obtutuque haeret defixus in uno. Stuck and struck by the amazing sights he sees on the temple, and then Dido appears, forma pulcherrima Dido, this most beautiful person, just happens to appear. If you remember back to, do you remember in episode one, we mentioned some of our favourite lines? I was talking about my wheelie bin experience, and I said one of my favourite from book four was Haeret latali litaris arundo, which we're going to come to soon. And I do recommend that if you're currently listening but not watching, if you want to pop over to YouTube and watch us, you will, for this next section, be able to see all of these different texts and passages on the screen. So please go and do that. We think that will really help as we move forward because we are immediately have a simile that compares Dido to Diana. Again, she's resplendent, she's in charge of beasts. So we have a long Diana simile. She then welcomes Aeneas's men, offers them hospitality, and even the city as theirs. I think that's a little reminder of Hypsipyle, isn't it? And Jason, where they're encouraging the men to stay a bit longer.
Yep.
And then this divine cloud is lifted from around Aeneas, and he also appears resplendent too. Um, Although, I mean, he's definitely like had his mum's help to get a glow up here. I don't think that's very fair, and I think shows that maybe he needs more help to be as pulcherrima, as beautiful as Dido naturally is. But either way, they are now well matched in their first meeting. So Dido invites him to the palace. He sends for young Ascanius, his son, And then we kind of get to the real beginning of this tragedy. Caroline, do you want to read the Latin and the English of this next bit that comes in about line, I think, 657 to 660 of book one?
I'd love to. Ad Cytherea novas artes nova pectore versat conciliut faciem mutatis et ora Cupido pro dulci Ascanio veniat donisque furentum incendat reginam ad quosibus implicit ignem. Lovely. But the Cytherean, that's Venus, is turning over new strategies and plans in her heart, i.e., that Cupid, changed in shape and face, might come in the place of or instead of sweet Ascanius and might inflame the raging queen. She's not raging yet, but she will be, and put fire in her bones or entwine her bones with fire. It's a weird fire's the object. And anyway, so yeah.
And we have
And
incendat at the beginning, the inflame, and then the ignem at the end, fire, don't we? So it's kind of covering the whole line there is this
and
sense of blazing.
fire is often associated with sexual passion in the Roman mindset.
Yeah, and it's going to the ossibus, deep to the bones. It's very
Right to
visceral,
the
isn't it?
marrow.
This
Right
isn't
to
this isn't a nice, happy feeling. And in fact, Venus, when she instructs Cupid to change the currently happy, so remember we've talked before about Aeneas being lightus, that word for happy. So at the moment Dido's happy, but this poison is going to come into her body, occultum, without her knowledge. So this is very much an external force coming upon Dido, not something that's growing from within her. So I would argue at this point, I am firmly Team Dido. This isn't just pouring love into her, this is like a destructive force designed to be intense and insidious.
She's being manipulated, yeah. And Virgil agrees because he says that Dido is unlucky. Let me read the next bit. Praecipue felix pesti devota futurae experimentem nequit adescit tuendo, foenisa et pariter puero donisque movetur. Especially the unlucky Phoenician queen, or female Phoenician Dido, doomed to future disaster. She is unable to be satisfied in her mind, and she burns ardescit as she gazes, and is stirred equally by the boy and the gifts. They brought a bunch of gifts from Troy. That's earlier. So they brought all these like bling, a lot of bling, and this beautiful young boy who I think is probably an adolescent, more like Eros than Cupid, the Greek idea of Eros. And then it carries on. Et magnum falsi implevit genitoris amorem reginam petit haec oculis haec pectore toto. Haeretin te dum gremio fovet inscia Dido, incidat quantus miserae Deus. A lot of weird stuff going on here. We've got Cupid disguised as Ascanius has just been hanging off the neck of Aeneas, and he filled his not father, his falsi genitoris, or he, again, this word implevit is where he put love into his false father,
Mhm.
his not father, and then he petit reginam, he seeks the queen, and she, with her eyes and her whole breast, clings to him, understood, and sometimes fondles him in her bosom. That's Fauvet and Gremio. Poor Dido, oblivious to how great a god sits on her lap. And that word insidat is like insidiat. He's not just sitting on her lap, he's getting into her.
Mhm.
He's taking up residence. And this is really quite creepy because there are a lot of very erotic terms like fondling and breast and lap, which have a lot of hyperlinks. So again, this is Ascanius as a kind of beautiful, or Eros as this beautiful adolescent, a mini version of Aeneas.
Yeah. And again we have that word hyret, that's where she's clinging, and the sense that this is going to be fixed. She's kind of fixing herself onto the child as if that blade sticks in deeper. There's nothing she can do about it. It takes hold, and she's inscia. She doesn't know, so she doesn't know the truth. So At this point, the end of book one, she then bids Aeneas to turn storyteller. And at line 749, just at the end, again, she's described as infelix, unlucky. Um, the sense of doom is beginning to build. But of course, we then now have a couple of books of Aeneas's storytelling, which takes us away from that. And then we cut back to book four.
Yeah, so books 2 and 3 are his version of what happened, and 2 is the amazing escape from Troy, and then 3 is his sailing around like Odysseus. So, and then it says she's as he's been talking, she's falling more and more in love with him, and she has a saukia, a love wound. And look out for that word saukius, wound. Will in all its variations, we'll find that it's again has these double meanings, a real wound but also a love wound. She's still in Felix, but she's now furens herself, reminding us of her brother's furor that caused the collapse of her first marriage. So here she is at last, described in a beautiful simile as a doe, a cerva. Uritur infelix Dido, totaque vagatur, ube ferens qualis conjecta cerva sagita, quam procul incautam nemora inter crescia fixit, pastor agens telis liquidque volatile ferm, nescia sila fuga silvas saltusque paragrat, dictaios haeret lateri letalis arundo. And it means desperate Dido burns with passion. It just says burns, but again, that word burns has a sexual passion undertone. And madly wanders the whole city like a deer whom an arrow has struck. Carefree in a distant Cretan grove, a shepherd hunting with a bow hit her, and without realizing he left a feathered, iron-tipped arrow in her. In flight, she plunges through woods and Dictaean pastures, the lethal shaft clinging to her side.
It's there's so much you could unpack. I mean, people have written so much about this simile, and I think we could happily talk, as we said, about every single word being a hyperlink to something else and being so carefully and cleverly put together. Especially also with the word order and the particular breaks in this passage, where the commas are, where those breaks. Obviously, Latin is a little bit different as well to how we then have put that into English, but the word order is still really important, and the things that are delayed, because we've got the subject of that sentence of the pastor, in this simile, the shepherd. So that's Aeneas, perhaps, because we associate him as being a hunter. But then obviously we've also got Cupid and his arrow being the one that's doing things. And then Nescius doesn't come for the other line. It's kind of really delayed to imply that actually, oh, has somebody purposefully targeted this deer, or were they not aware? Were they actually careless? Because were they trying to wound or kill this deer, or they just did it accidentally? And then the deer was vagator, wandering, so maybe it's her fault, the deer's fault, that she's kind of wandering and just got in the way. And who is incautam? Who is the one that's being unaware or reckless? Is it the shepherd? No. Is it the person who's been hit? So it's an amazing simile because it's just filled with ambiguity, isn't it? And I think it's so beautifully constructed. And as I say, it ends with my sort of favourite bit, that haeret latale latatis arundo. But before that as well, Silvas Saltus Square. There's just so many beautiful sounds in there as well.
And I'm glad you mentioned ambiguity because I think we're discovering that's Virgil's middle name, isn't it? Virgil Ambiguity Morrow. And I think Nescius, unaware, both of them are unaware. He's been hunting, but maybe just fired off. And I mean, he's been hunting, but he doesn't know. She doesn't know. They're both wandering around, just happily wandering, and this disaster occurs. So we know who's to blame. It's got to be the gods. But there's a moment, there's something, a moment you mentioned to me, Katrina, in our podcast about limen, threshold, where you mentioned how Dido hesitates in her bedroom before emerging to go on the hunt, which will lead with
Okay, yeah,
her.
so a little bit further in this book, only a few hundred lines later, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. So she's accepted Aeneas. She's welcomed him generously. They've had the wonderful dinner with the story. She's kind of beginning to fall in love, and now really falling in love because she's been being manipulated by the gods, by two gods, Juno and Venus, and if you count Cupid as well. So then she's in her room. They're preparing to go on a big hunt, And you talked about how she lingers at the threshold. And so I would look back at that passage and I had this sort of revelation that you can only have if you look at the original language. And let me read it in Latin. Reginam thalamo cunctantem ad limina primi, poenorum expectantos troque insignis et auro, statsoni pesac frena ferox spumantia mandit, tandem progreditur. And doing this quite literally, quite clunkily, the most important Phoenicians, the primi of the Poenorum, await the queen, but she hesitates at the threshold of her bedchamber. And he's used the word thalamos, which is a Greek word that actually originally means a marriage bed. So you'll immediately be thinking of the honeymoon suite in a way. This is
Mhm.
her bedroom essentially. So she hesitates at the threshold of her bedchamber. Outstanding in purple and gold stands her stamping steed. Fierce it champs its frothing reins. At last she steps forward. Wait, what? What's going on here? Where did that horse come from? She's in her bedroom, beautiful in gold and purple, and suddenly there's a horse there. It for two verses, and then at last she steps forward. And the word for horse is a weird one. It's sonipes, which means sound and foot. Pes is foot, and soni is sound. It's a stamping foot. One of them, it's a horse that stamps its foot. So which of them is outstanding in purple or gold? I was wondering, Dido and the horse, or both of them, and what is the horse doing in the bedchamber? Now Dryden, who expands, usually helpfully, tries to solve this problem by placing the horse in the court below. But that's not in the translation. Here's his translation, which smooths over that jolt. But does Virgil want it to be smoothed over? I'll read Dryden. For the slow queen in antechambers wait, her lofty courser in the court below, who his majestic rider seems to know, proud of his purple trappings, paws the ground, that's all expanded,
Yeah,
and chaps the golden bit and spreads the foam around. The queen at length appears on either hand, the brawny guards in martial order stand. It's good stuff, but he's been,
definitely expanded.
yeah, and according to his visual image. And now when I read of this, I've been reading Plato in another class, and I immediately thought of Plato's tripartite soul as described in his dialogue, The Phaedrus, where he talks about the reason part of the human soul as the charioteer, logos. And he's the charioteer trying to control two horses, courage or spirit, thumos, and carnal appetites, eros. And that courage or spirit can also be thumos, the desire to do what's right, and then eros is a conflicting desire, and thumos is a white horse and eros is a black horse. And what if this horse, I wondered, is not down in the courtyard? What if it's symbolic of her desire for Aeneas? It's her black horse in her soul that she's trying to control. And we said that in a previous episode, when a character crosses a physical threshold, they're often also crossing an emotional threshold. And she's about this. When she steps out, she knows when she's going on this hunt, she's going to surrender to her passion. And I don't think we have permission to use it, but if we do, there's a wonderful mosaic of Aeneas' story from Low Ham here in Britannia, in Britain. And it shows Aeneas, Dido riding out for the hunt, wearing nothing but a little cloak. She's completely nude. So,
Is the horse there in purple and gold? Because one of them is, but
oh, I don't know. We have to look at that. And then there's another one of her in the cave, and Aeneas is completely dressed, but she's totally naked. It's seen from the back, and she's got her arms around him. So, but she knows that when she steps out, she's saying yes to this. And I think um, in the dialogue, the Phaedrus, Plato has Socrates put forth the argument that eros is not a diseased state of mind, but it's a kind of divine madness, theomania. So although Dido is literally possessed by divine madness, imposed by these manipulating goddesses, I think Virgil's hinting that she still has a bit of agency. She can still rein in that divine madness of Eros or not. Or maybe she doesn't. But the moment she steps over, she's saying yes to Eros, really.
Mhm. And the difficult bit with the taking sides, I suppose, on this, on Team Dido, Team Aeneas, and the role of the gods, and whether that wild passion and frenzy that has come from somewhere else, whether they're leaning into that or not, is that Virgil is so vague. I mean, we've just seen there the ambiguity in that section, but then the next part with the hunt, this cave scene, it's as if he just draws the Hollywood shutters across and says, "Okay, interval time, everyone, come back afterwards to find out the after effects." And we never really quite know what happened, and that then so cleverly leads into the rest of the book and the confusion that's going to come, the arguments they're going to have because nobody can quite agree on the right version of their story. Um, in theory, from the beginning, their relationship has seemed doomed because we haven't mentioned yet her sister, Anna, who appears in this book, Dido's sister. She tells her that she took an oath after Zacchaeus that she wouldn't remarry. So, in theory, this can't happen at all. Not that Anna actually tries to put her off, but anyway. We've also then got Aeneas's destiny. He has to move on. He has to go and found Rome. So it can't work out. This is why it's kind of totally set up to be a disaster from the kind of the plot mechanics of it as well.
Yeah, and the more I've been rereading and rereading this chapter, I see Anna has quite a lot of blame herself, you know? But anyway, they're essentially, that's a whole other thing. They're essentially these two lovers, so suited to each other, apparently, both beautiful, both building a new city, both having suffered trauma, as you said. They're so suited, but they are being manipulated by the gods. And Juno and Venus have their own battle of words in book four. So again, I do think they still have a bit of agency, as we all do. You could always say, you know, the devil made me do it. So Aeneas leaves. He overcomes his passion and leaves, even though he says that Italiam non sponte sequor. I go to Italy not of my own volition. And there's actually a section midway through the book where he's really wrestling with what to do. And I think by now he knows her temperament and he's trying to think of the best moment to tell her that he's got to leave.
But he's also a bit like a boy kind of frightened to stand up to his mum or say something difficult, isn't he? I think this is where our own personal kind of experiences or our modern perspective can come on these bits because we're trying to find who we maybe empathise with most. And I think naturally we don't just equally empathise with both characters. We do sort of take a bit of a side from one or the other. Even like I say, though, we don't really know the whole facts. Because he kind of ends up ghosting her in a sort of very 21st century fashion, doesn't he?
Yeah, we love to take sides, and I love black and white. You know, I love putting things in this box and that box. But Virgil, thank goodness, he's like Homer in that he shows every character except maybe the Furies and Alecto with compassion and nuance.
Mhm.
And it's no one's fault. You know, you can't really team up, though we can maybe if we want. But I'm like Dido. I'm super hot tempered and big mouth, and my husband goes very quiet. so so I totally understand this. He's feeling something deeply, but he's trouble. He can't get it out, and I think Aeneas genuinely wants to tell her. He's waiting for the right moment, but then rumor, who's got no nuance, pure evil, quite creepy. She's this character with feathers and eyes under each feather and voices. She's like the modern internet. She gets there first, and Dido finds out, and so Dido's furious with him, and she's furenti incensa. She's described like a bacchante, like a mina. These women possessed by the madness of Dionysus or wine or both. And of course, the dialogue between them has inspired operas and plays and more. And it's a great section to read through or maybe even act out. Now, although I've been very betrayed, not by my current husband, um, but I totally, nonetheless, do take Aeneas's side. I think it really hurts him to leave her. He's doing what's right at great cost. And I just want to quote from the new translation of the Aeneid that I'm really loving by McGill and Wright. Faithful Aeneas longed to soothe her grief, to talk and ease her pain. His sighs kept coming, great love shook his resolve, but even so he kept the gods' commands and sought his fleet.
Yeah, and as the book continues, there is this maybe slight change in tone, I think, from Virgil, because Dido starts laying claims that a marriage has taken place, That's the bit that we've not really formally seen. That Aeneas has caused her to lose her self-respect, lost her chance of a child. He claims, as you said, that he doesn't leave willingly, not of his own accord, that it's his new homeland. Although I suppose you've got to think from her perspective, he's talking about his love for this new homeland that he's never seen and he doesn't know if it exists, instead of his love for her. So maybe that might be a little bit painful. But Dido then tells Anna again that he's a traitor and a betrayer of their marriage. So it's quite some of the language she's using as well is quite extreme. Obviously it's through high passion and anger. And then it's the fates that turn his ears cold, and her agency then starts to increase. So she plans her own death, and her resolve increases as she does so. We sort of actually now see Dido at her most powerful, but she still remains in Felix. She's still, however we want to translate that, unlucky, poor, miserable, unfortunate. But she's now stronger, I think, than she's ever been before. And Anna doesn't recognise the furores, the madnesses that Virgil is saying have overcome Dido. And then we've got that famous phrase from the mouth of Mercury, who kind of comes down yet again to Aeneas to, remind him that he's got to go, he's got to leave, threatening death at Dido's hands if he tarries. So at 4, 5, 6, 7, I think the line is, we get that famous quote, Varium et mutabilis semper femina. Women always variable and changing her mind. I think sadly a Virgil quote that may have affected the treatment of women through the centuries, but something that I know also maybe would be said in many an argument. I'd like actually here at this point to give a little shout out to some of our listeners, especially to a group of Latin learners based in Shrewsbury Museum, who, along with one of our CA members, Margaret, meet regularly to discuss ancient literature, and they are currently doing a read through of the Aeneid, and they are on book 4 at the moment, and this very section where Dido lays some curses on Aeneas. So, hi, hello to the Shrewsbury Latin group. Hope you're enjoying, and I hope you're enjoying the episode, and we'd love to hear from you, your thoughts as you've been going through the text.
Hello to the Shrewsbury Latin group, and anybody give us your feedback. And so yes, she's like an Athenian tragic character, isn't she? From Athenian tragedy at
Mhm.
this point.
Yeah,
And these curses are quite heavy on. She at one point says she wishes she could have chopped him up in bits, or even, this is horrible, chopped up Ascanius and fed him to Aeneas. That's pretty Medea-like.
yeah,
Um, and then of course she lays a real curse on him, which will indeed affect the rest of his life. She says, "Let there be war between our nations and between our sons forever, and may an avenger rise up." And that's of course going to be Hannibal, who will later bring Rome to the precipice of destruction.
yeah. So we've
And
got that real historical jump forward, which in a way you could think might jolt us out of the story a bit to suddenly get this reference. But I think, again, Virgil does it very well that the reader gets that real sense of, oh, this is actually real. The power of her anger has led to something that has affected our recent history.
we have other sources about Dido, and none of them mention that there's no connection between Aeneas. So this is Virgil's invention, and it's what he's done is another trope, the backstory, or the ghost, as John Truby, my mentor, calls it, the thing that's haunting the hero from the past. And essentially, through this failed relationship, he's explaining the whole enmity between Rome and Carthage that happened over many years with huge loss of life and the eventual destruction of Carthage. So it's so clever, this passionate, doomed love affair is the seed that started this conflict between these two great maritime nations. So, and of course, her suicide at the end of book 4 has parallels with Cleopatra,
Yeah.
who committed suicide in 30 BC, a year after the Battle of Actium. And many Romans were horrified when Mark Antony, took up with Cleopatra, this foreign queen. And, they were seriously afraid that he would move the capital of the empire to Alexandria or somewhere in the east. So this is again quite resonant with what someone in the late first century BC would have been thinking. And
Mhm.
on her suicide pyre, she expresses her pride in what she's built. and she suggests that she's lived her life allotted to the course of fortune is set before me. Though she's that's not the course that fortune wanted for her. We know that because she finds it hard to die, and it wasn't her appointed time.
Hmm.
And she has a final chance to curse Aeneas, and she does. Um, and she says that she would have been Felix if the Trojans had never come, and that he's crudelis. And she then falls upon her sword and dies. It's a hard death.
Yeah.
And her sister Anna manages to get to her. Some people say she immolates herself, but the pyre is burned afterwards. She doesn't like throw herself on the flames. She kills herself with a sword, though there was a history of immolation in Carthage, which would have again had resonances. Archaeological evidence supports that.
Yeah, so this is the cost of founding the new city, that quote that we've had from the beginning, the death of somebody else who'd actually achieved Aeneas's goal. Not only has this been a sort of personal roller coaster and she's been the opponent in this love relationship, but she's also been essentially a bad omen for what happens to these brilliant leaders and what can happen when you're trying to found a new city that he's now got to leave and still hasn't done. His journey continues to try and emulate some of what she'd achieved, but for him not to end up the same way as her.
Yeah, and he was sad because he was quite happy. The moment Mercury finds him, he's busily helping to build these new buildings, and he's wearing his outfit, and I think he was happy. But no, he can't have happiness. He's got a destiny, a divine destiny.
Yeah, so we leave Dido, but because the word, our hyperlink for this episode, Cerva, I hope that you haven't forgotten that first simile. We want to just come back to it because there are two other really important references to Cerva in the Aeneid. And there's one in book 7, so a few books later, where Ascanius unwittingly shoots a pet deer and it sparks this war between the native Latins and the Trojans. Bad move, hoping they were at that point to make an alliance. So the translation of this, so it's Aeneid 7:496 onwards, is but he himself, Ascanius, fired by love of exceptional praise, directed sharp arrows with a bow of curved horn. Nor did the goddess, in this case Alecto, ignore his wobbling right hand. Driven with a great thrum, a shaft came through belly and groin. Wounded, the creature fled to its known home, and groaning reached its stable, bloody, and began filling the whole space with a wail like a suppliant.
Yeah, just before you say something, I wanted to point out that the word stomach is uterum, like uterus, and so these are, although it's a male deer, you've got this kind of image of the shaft um, punching into its belly and groin, which is quite subliminal.
Yeah, for sure. Again, we've got that sense of it sticking in the side. We've got Harundo, which appeared in that earlier simile. And
Yeah,
again, it's
Harindo means a reed or an arrow. Yeah, Harindo, reed or arrow.
it's Aeneas's son who is the catalyst for a wound, a Saucia. In this sense, it's more of a literal physical wound than a love wound, and he's old enough this time to do it himself. It's not in the guise of a baby Cupid kind of sat on her lap, but it's still with a scheming goddess's help who's changing the course of an arrow, changing the course of the plot, and now creating a new opponent for Aeneas.
Yeah, yeah. And again, I've been doing retellings of Virgil's Aeneid. I was trying to figure out how old Ascanius would be, and I guess he's about 11 or 12. So again, he's young Eros rather than baby Cupid. He's old enough to just be starting. A 12-year-old would have quite fun, with a bow and arrow.
Hmm.
So we have that in book 7, but then at the very end, we have another beautiful Kerwa simile at the end of book 12. Um, and it's coming back, it's showing Aeneas as a shepherd of his men and the hunter, the kind of hunter from book 1. And he's just been struck by an arrow. My favorite fresco from Roman times is one of Aeneas from Pompeii having an arrow removed from his thigh. I probably mentioned it before. And he looks very young and handsome, a little bit like Augustus, interestingly, who's also prettified by the ancient artists. So he's been struck by an arrow, and he's now he's come to the final battle, which is step 5 of my plot beats. The final battle with his this version of his enemy, Turnus, who's of course just a minion of Juno, really. And he's depicted as a hunting dog chasing a stag, a caravum, who is Turnus. And we're going to get Hyrate again, and let's read it. It's from 12, book 12, lines 754 following. Nec minus Aeneas quamquam tar data sagita inter dum genua impedient cursum quae recusant in sequitur trepidique pedem pede fervidus urget inclusum veluti siquando flumine nanctus cervum aut puniceae saeptum formidine pinae venator cursu canis et latratibus instat illautem insidis et ripateritus salta mille refugitque vias at vividus umber haeret hians iamque tenet similisque tenenti increpuit malis morsuque elusus inanest. Lots of alliteration there and lots of repetitions. We've got pedem pede,
Yeah.
and we've got fugit refugitque, and one, let me translate it for you. Nonetheless, Aeneas, though his knees made slow by an arrow sometimes slow him and object to running, pursues. Furious, he matches his footsteps to the anxious footsteps of Turnus, understood. Just as sometimes a hunting dog, having come upon a deer enclosed by a river or hedged in by fear of the purple feathers, they used a snare with feathers to kind of distract and confuse an animal. And these are, notice, they're purple punicae, which makes us think of Phoenician and Dido. So the deer can be either hedged in by the river or this snare that's been set by the hunters ahead of time with purple feathers. The dog threatens him, the deer, with speed and barking, and the deer, terrified by the traps in the high riverbank, flees back and forth down 1,000 paths. But the vigorous Umbrian hound clings higher at with yawning jaws, and that's great. That higher at hians, higher at clings, and hians means yawning, and there's that lovely higher at hians, clings with yawning jaws, and now holds him, and now thinking he holds him, he growls with his jaws and is mocked by an empty bite.
It's just brilliant. There's so much in there. Like you say, there's this polysyndeton, this use of extra ands, yamque, tenet, similisque. Those queers put the ands in the middle, and you've got such an increase in speed, as you were doing just then reading the English translation as well in that final section. And here is the venator. So we had Aeneas as the pastor originally, the kind of shepherd, the hunter in a much kind of calmer setting, and now the venator is more what we associate with being, in the fighting arena, isn't it? It's a kind of hunting dog with real.
Yeah, and venator goes with canis. It's a hunting dog, right? A dog who is a hunter. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's really powerful, this scene. And as you say, not only do we have these references back to the Phoenicians, that's the really clever use of the word purple, and we're going to come back to that in a later episode. Um, but also bringing us back almost full cycle. There's a real arc here, isn't there, to Aeneas' character. We keep talking about, does he grow? Does he develop? Does he have any character change? Is he this two-dimensional, three-dimensional character? Has he become a kind of a Roman hero from earlier on in the story? And you could argue that in book one, he's a hunter who's finding fodder for his men, and he's a leader in that sense. But by book 12, his way of being a hunter has been to hunt to kill people, not just deer for food. It's become that he's really filled with vengeance, but also with this kind of fighting fury that's going to get him his goal, even though we know it comes at a cost at the end.
Absolutely. And we're gonna see a dichotomy between furor and fury and piety. The pietas is always going to be the black horse and the white horse in a way.
Yeah. So I think we'll leave it there in that dramatic simile to let you ponder the fate of that Cervum and of the Cerva which is Dido. Please send in your thoughts. We'd love to know where you sit on this debate, where what you think of book four. Is it your favourite book? Is Dido the character that you empathise with the most, or is there somebody else? We look forward to next week and a word you probably don't know. What's our word for next week? We can give a little taster.
It's viscum. Viscum. If you know what that is without going to your lexicon, pat yourself on the back.
For sure. And
Gardeners
now
might know it.
And now stay with us if you'd like to hear a little bit extra, because we're going to stay on for a bonus few minutes to talk a bit more about some of the features of book four. And we might find out a little bit more about Anna, that sister of Dido. Thank you so much for joining us on the Classics podcast does Virgil's Aeneid. See you next time.
Bye. Vale. Valete.